In a remote village surrounded by dense forests, there stood an old, abandoned house. Locals always avoided it, believing it to be cursed. But one day, a couple, Alexei and Victoria, moved in. They dreamed of a peaceful life, far from the city, a home free from noise and chaos. For the first few weeks, it was like a fairy tale. They worked on restoring the house, cleaning the garden, and spending nights by the fireplace. But soon, strange things began to happen. At first, it was barely noticeable sounds, rustling in dark corners, footsteps that couldn't be explained. Victoria started to feel a strange heaviness in the air, as if something unseen was watching them. Alexei didn't believe in the supernatural and brushed it off. But the longer they stayed in the house, the stronger the sense of dread became. One night, after they had fallen asleep, Victoria woke up with the feeling that someone was standing nearby. She turned and saw Alexei lying next to her, but his eyes were open, empty, and cold. She tried to wake him, but he remained motionless. Her heart pounded with fear, and she leapt from the bed. When she returned, Alexei was already sitting upright, but his gaze was strange, unnatural. He moved toward her, whispering softly, "You shouldn't have stayed here." Victoria stepped back, feeling cold terror grip her body. This wasn't her husband. It was someone or something that had taken his form. In a panic, she ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. She felt the walls closing in, her breath growing heavy. Suddenly, in the shadows of the corridor, she saw a figure. Alexei was standing there, but now his face was distorted with horror, and his eyes glowed with a yellow light. Victoria fled into another room, desperately searching for an escape, but every corridor led her back to the same hall. The more she tried to flee, the stronger her fear became. Finally, she found herself in the center of the house, realizing that every door, every window, every path led to one single point, a dark corner where those who had once lived there now stood. The shadows began to move toward her, and Victoria understood. It was her turn now. The house wouldn't let her go, just as it hadn't released anyone who had ever stayed there. The walls began to close in, and suddenly she heard a familiar voice. Alexei was beside her again, but his voice was a whisper from the depths of an abyss. "You are now one of us." She turned and saw him standing in the darkness, his empty eyes just like the ones in the old photographs they had found in the house. Victoria realized she was no longer herself. She had been consumed by the house, which now owned her, just as it had claimed everyone who had ever stepped inside.